Somewhere along Louisiana's Mississippi River corridor on March 14, 1853, a transaction took place in a parish courtroom that would be purposefully left out of official auction records for more than a century. The price of a loaf of bread was $12, but a pregnant woman was sold for $12. According to court records, the sale was legitimate and was observed by 7 men, whose signatures are still on the selling deed. However, neither before nor after that day was the woman's name listed in any parish registry. In 1897, when renovating the courthouse, local historians found the receipt, sealed it behind a wall, and promptly returned it. They decided to keep quiet over the truth after reading what was stated on the reverse of the receipt. What was concealed and why the 7 witnesses' family worked for decades to make sure this narrative died with them are revealed tonight. I need you to do something before we go on to the tale of what transpired in that Louisiana courthouse. Ones like this one, ones they attempted to hide, must be told. Therefore, please subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell. Where are you listening from at the moment, by the way? Leave your city or state in the comments section. Let's examine the extent to which these obscure histories extend. That March morning's transaction was not an anomaly resulting from confusion or mayhem. Under the laws that applied to Louisiana in the years preceding the Civil War, it was purposeful, well thought out, and completely lawful. In 1853, St. Helena Parish was a place where the riches of the land was measured in people rather than acres, where the air tasted of river silt and sugarcane smoke, and where Spanish moss hung so thickly from the live oaks that sunshine hardly made it to the ground. The church was situated in the Fertile Crescent between Baton Rouge and the Mississippi River, far enough away to protect its secrets while still being near enough to the river to thrive. With its whitewashed buildings clustered around a courthouse square, the town of Greensburg functioned as the parish seat, where business was performed with the formality of a church service. The courthouse steps were turned into an auction block every Saturday. People, land, animals, and furniture were all transferred with equal bureaucratic efficiency. The auctioneers were well versed in their field. The purchasers were aware of their limitations, and everybody knew that what took place on those steps was authorized by law, blessed by tradition, and upheld by persons who thought of themselves as the creators of civilization. 3 men were very influential in St. Helena Parish that spring. Using the authority of Scripture, Judge Amos Crenshaw presided over the district court. He was 62 years old and had spent 40 years interpreting laws that prioritized property protection. His choices molded the parish with a power that seemed to be inherent to nature, much way a river gradually and unavoidably shapes its banks. Duncan Fairholme, a plantation owner whose family had possessed more than 4,000 acres of prime cotton land since Louisiana became a state, was beneath him in power but on par with him in ambition. State. Fairholme, 47, was a French fluent speaker, a cutthroat businessman, and a Charleston graduate. Silas Guthrie, an overseer on his plantation Bellamont, was known for his brutality, which was enough to keep the slave population in line. Nathaniel Puett, the parish tax assessor and deed recorder, was the third figure in this power triangle. In a culture where his name meant nothing and his family name meant everything, Puett, who was 39 years old, was desperate for prestige. He had traveled from Virginia to Louisiana with fake letters of introduction and the knowledge that a man might reinvent himself in the midst of the chaos of westward migration. If he was prepared to do action that others would not, because of a woman whose presence had been meticulously removed from every record under their control. These 3 men came into contact on the morning of March 14th. Clarara was her name. About 23 years prior, she had been born in Virginia on a tobacco plantation. Because enslaved persons were frequently denied the dignity of recorded birth dates, the word approximately is important in this context. On a Tuesday morning in late summer, she was sold south at the age of 15, separated from her mother and 2 younger siblings in an auction house in Richmond. The individual who Edmund Fairholme, Duncan's father, bought her. He passed away from cholera in 1849, leaving his son his entire estate, including 47 humans. Clarara was employed at Bellamont's main home. She had a quiet dignity that Duncan Fairholme first observed, then despised and ultimately attempted to destroy. She was also shrewd with numbers and literate, despite laws prohibiting it. In 1852, Clara became pregnant in October. The father's name was never spoken out loud by her. She didn't have to. In the main home, everyone was aware. Her co-workers, who were enslaved women, were aware. Margaret Duncan Fairholm's wife was aware of it, and Duncan himself was so furious that he could hardly look at Clara Ara without his hands shaking. It was his younger brother William, because the father was not Duncan. Duncan was not anything compared to William Fairholm. William smiled easily, but Duncan was stern. In contrast to Duncan, who viewed people as agricultural assets, William the underlying immorality of the system he profited from and lacked the guts to challenge. Living in the overseer's cabin on the outside of Belmont's property, he was 28 years old, single, and primarily drank and read abolitionist books that he smuggled from New Orleans. He was also supposedly in charge of the northern fields. Conversation was the first step for his relationship with Clara Ara. Twice a day she brought food to the cottage. He inquired about her life prior to Belmont. She knew he listened differently than other white males, so she answered carefully at first, then more honestly. Conversation evolved over the course of several months, transcending all the boundaries their civilization had established. William did something out of the ordinary when Clara Ara's pregnancy started to show in late December. He approached his brother and made a deal to buy Clara Ara's release. The discussion took place on a Saturday night in Duncan's study. What was spoken is not recorded in writing, but the events that followed were meticulously recorded. Duncan more than declined the offer. It was an insult to him. He believed that William had betrayed the sanctity of property rights, jeopardized the racial hierarchy that underpinned their entire society, and disgraced the Fairholm name in a way that, if known to the world, could have destroyed their reputation. William maintained that they should be permitted to travel north to a free state in order to establish a life outside the purview of Louisiana law, because he loved Clara Ara and the kid was his. Instead of selling Clara to a slave trader who may take her far away where William could never find her, Duncan responded by selling her right away. That would be too easy and too forgiving. Duncan wanted his brother to observe, to see, to comprehend the repercussions of what he described as his treachery. He made arrangements for Clara to be part of the March 14th public auction, which is a standard sale of property seized for unpaid debts. The steps of the courthouse, in plain sight and completely lawful. However, Duncan included a clause that exposed the full extent of his brutality. Clara's minimum bid was set at 12 cents by him. It was a purposeful amount. Louisiana's typical price for a childbearing age enslaved woman in 1853 was between $800 and $200. Setting the price at 12 allowed Duncan to accomplish multiple goals at once. He proved that Clara was worthless to him. By demonstrating that the lady he professed to love was worth less than a newspaper, he degraded William. Most cleverly, he made sure that no real buyer would place a bid, because quality was indicated by price in the slave economy. A female offered for 12 cents must be broken, ill, or unfit for employment. Plantation owners would never risk even a little amount of money on such blatant refutations. Duncan was certain that only one person would place a bid. He had no intention of selling Clara to an unknown individual. The purpose was to sell her to a person who would guarantee that her misery persisted in situations that William was powerless to stop. He was selling her to his supervisor, Silas Guthrie. The evening prior to William Fairholm vanished. Sometime after midnight, he left no letter, took no horse, just left Belmont and was never seen again in St. Helena Parish. According to some, he traveled north to Boston to join abolitionists. Others said that, unable to cope with his helplessness, he drowned himself in the Mississippi. Some whispered that Duncan had him executed and buried in the cane fields, where unmarked graves already held dozens of enslaved people. The reality was concurrently easier and more unsettling. In the hours before dawn, William had visited Judge Crenshaw's house and offered him all he owned, including land rights and an estimated $3,000 in inheritance, in exchange for one favor. In order to allow William time to come up with a different plan, he wanted the judge to declare the sale illegal on a technicality. With the look of a man observing a child explain why the sky should be green rather than blue, Judge Crenshaw listened to Williams's plea. The judge only asked one question after William was done. Was the correct deed of sale signed by your brother? William acknowledged that he had. Then the deal is legitimate. Good evening, Mr. Fairholm, Crenshaw stated. Your grief does not supersede property law. William left that house knowing that every institution, law, and influential man in the parish would support Duncan, not because they were cruel, though many were, but because letting William's sentiment override Duncan's property rights would jeopardize the entire basis of their economy. If love could triumph over ownership, then they knew they would probably never see her again, knowing what men like Silas Guthrie did to women they owned. Clara spent her final night at Bellamont in the quarters, surrounded by women who braided her hair and sang songs that were older than Louisiana, older than America, songs carried from Africa in the bellies of ships. One of the women, an elderly cook named Bethy, who had survived 50 years of bondage, pressed a small bundle of cloth into Clara Ara's hands. Inside was a dagger barely longer than Clara Ara's palm wrapped in oilcloth. "You hide this," Bethy murmured. "You hide it good." Clara Ara nodded, understanding that the knife was used for mercy rather than self-defense, for her child in the event that things grew intolerable, and for herself if there was no other option. And when the time comes, you do what needs doing. Nathaniel Pewitt stood on the courthouse steps with the deed of sale in his hands, reading from it in a voice meant to carry across the square, "Other escape." She sewed it into the hem of her dress that night, her fingers steady despite the fear that tasted like copper in her mouth. The auction started at 10 in the morning under skies so gray that they seemed to mirror the moral character of everything happening beneath them. About 40 people gathered in the courthouse square, most of them for the livestock and furniture, while a few came specifically for the human merchandise. A murmur echoed through the crowd as he described Clara Ara, a female about 23 years old, house-trained, literate, though such skill is of questionable value, currently with a child, for a minimum bid of 12 cents. Something was wrong with this one. A number of men who had been Silas Guthrie stood near the front, his hat pulled low, his expression unreadable, waiting for the crowd to disperse, waiting for the moment when no one else would bid, waiting for him to buy Clara Ara for the pittance Duncan had arranged, waiting for her to become his property to do as he pleased. However, something unexpected happened when a man near the back of the crowd raised his hand. 12 cents, he called out, and every head turned. He was ready to bid right away, but he lost interest. Why risk investment on obviously defective property? Nathaniel Pewitt hesitated. "You are bidding 12 cents for this property. I am your name, sir?" "Isaiah Mercer." The man was tall, thin, and wearing a traveler's coat that was dusty from the road. His face was weathered in a way that suggested years of outdoor labor, but his bearing was incorrect for a field hand. He stood too straight and looked people in the eye too directly. Pewitt looked toward Silas Guthrie, who was looking at the stranger with a look of genuine bewilderment. Isaiah Mercer came to the steps, reached into his pocket, and put 12 copper pennies on the podium where Pewitt stood. "I do." Duncan had made sure that Guthrie was the only bidder. Who was this man? "Do you have 12 cents, Mr. Mercer?" Judge Crenshaw watched this exchange with growing interest from his position near the courthouse door. He had come to the auction especially to make sure Duncan's plan went through, but now there was an unknown factor. Pewitt looked frantically at Silas Guthrie, whose face had turned red. He knew what was going on, and he knew that if he bid 13 cents he would show his interest and make public what should have been a private transaction. To give the impression that he was helping Bellamont by taking useless property off their hands, Duncan had specifically told him to wait until no one else bid. If he didn't, however, Clara would go to this stranger. The seconds passed, the crowd waited, and then Silas Guthrie spoke. 13 cents. Isaiah Mercer didn't hesitate. This was not how these auctions usually went. But something strange was happening. Two men bidding against each other for a woman being offered at shelter costs. Guthrie snapped 25 cents, 50 cents, and $1. The audience was captivated. What did they do? The whole point was to buy Clara Ara quietly to make it seem insignificant. But it was no longer insignificant. Silas Guthrie bid 2, Isaiah Mercer bid 5, and Guthrie stopped at $10. Not because he was short on cash, but because Duncan had given him specific instructions. Do not overpay. Do not draw attention. During this entire exchange, Clara Ara had been standing to the side of the courthouse steps, her hands bound in front of her, her pregnancy visible beneath the thin dress she wore. She looked at the man who had just bought her, and Isaiah Mercer met her gaze. Nathaniel Pewitt called out uncertainly, $10 once, $10 twice. He waited, looking toward Judge Crenshaw for guidance. The judge gave a slight nod. Sold to Mr. Isaiah Mercer for $10. Even though his face remained the same, Clara Ara noticed something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Recognition. Within minutes, the deed of sale was signed. Isaiah Mercer paid the $10 in coins he had meticulously counted out onto Puitt's desk, and Judge Crenshaw signed the document, proving that Clara Ara was now legally the property of a man she had never met before that morning. However, the sale's irregularity had drawn notice. As Mercer escorted Clara Ara out of the courthouse and toward a wagon that was waiting at the square's edge, Duncan Fairholme appeared from inside the building, where he had been observing through a window. "Mr. Mercer," Duncan called, his voice sharp and used to obedience. "A moment of your time." Isaiah Mercer halted. He kept Clara's arm in place, and when he looked at Duncan, his demeanor was deliberately blank. "Mr. Fairholme, you are not from this parish. I am not. What brings you to St. Helena? Business." Duncan stepped closer, attempting to put this man in recognize what just transpired. The auction was intended to be controlled and predictable, but this result was neither. "What kind of business?" "My own sort," Mercer said in a stern but calm voice. "The transaction was lawful. The court saw it unless you have some issue to the sale." "No objection," Duncan said slowly. "Though I am curious." It was a challenge disguised as a question, and Duncan recognized it right away. If he objected, he would have to give grounds, and what grounds could he offer? That he had purposefully undervalued Clara Ara to make his brother look bad? That he had arranged for his overseer to buy her for reasons he didn't want to publicly discuss. "What are your plans for the property you bought for that amount of money?" "I'm in charge of it, Mr. Fairholme. Greetings." Turning, Isaiah Mercer headed for the wagon. Clara was walking next to him, her thoughts racing. This was all illogical. This man paid $10, a substantial amount, to bid against Silas Guthrie for a woman who was being auctioned as refuse. She was more frightened by what she saw when she looked into his eyes than by anything that had occurred in the previous 4 months. He was aware of her identity, not just her circumstances, not just her name. He was acquainted with her. They arrived at the wagon, a plain canvas-covered agricultural cart. With an impersonal but gentle touch, Mercer assisted her in climbing into the back. After that, he mounted the driver's seat, grabbed the reins, and propelled the horse ahead. They silently rode into Greensburg, past the homes and shops, past the white church steeple, beyond the line where pine woodland replaced farmed land. Isaiah Mercer didn't say anything until they were well out of town's line of sight. "You don't recall me," Clara spoke in a wary tone. "Must I?" "August 1845, Richmond. You were 15 years old. On the day you were sold, I was present." The blood of Clara froze. "You attended the auction?" "Yes, I was." Mercer continued to focus on the road. "I was employed by a slave trader named Ephraim Dalton. I oversaw his property and drove his carts. I saw you stand on that block with your family. When they separated you, I saw your mother scream. I observed Edmund Fairholme will escort you away after paying $700. "Then you are no different than the rest of them," Clara Ara replied in a firm voice. "I was no different," Mercer clarified. "I am no longer that man." He took a folded piece of paper out of his coat and gave it to Clara Ara, who read it without turning away from the road. With trembling hands, Clara Ara opened the paper, which was Isaiah Mercer's signature, was at the bottom of the unsigned deed of manumission, a document that, when properly executed and filed, would grant freedom to an enslaved person. The name on the document was hers, Clara Ara, without a last name because she had never been given one, but her description matched her age and the scar on her left forearm from a childhood burn. "I don't understand," Clara muttered. Mercer said, "I watched your family destroyed on an auction block 8 years ago." His voice was steady, but there was something underneath it that could have been grief or shame, or both. "I told myself that I was just doing my job, that I was not in charge of the system, that I was just a small part of a big machine. Then one night in New Orleans, I watched Ephraim Dalton slowly beat a man to death over $5. He paused, maneuvering the wagon around a fallen branch. 3 months ago, a man named William Fairholme attended a meeting in Cincinnati. I went north and worked with people who were attempting to dismantle what I had helped build. I came to the realization that every participant, no matter how small their role, makes the machine function." Clara Ara's hand automatically went to her stomach. "William sent you." "He paid me," Mercer said, "not to purchase you. He told us about a woman in Louisiana who was carrying his child and that his brother was going to sell her to a brutal overseer. He also gave us the date and location of the auction. I was hired by him to bring you north to an Illinois safe house. To a land of freedom for you and your child. Where is William now? Clara gazed at the act in her hands. Freedom. The word felt alien and unattainable. It was a promise that had been used as a weapon against slaves for so long that she had lost faith in it. The people I work with believe it may not have been fever, but someone from Louisiana tracked him down. Clara closed her eyes. Mercer's silence answered before his words did. He died 2 weeks ago. Fever, they said. He was in Kentucky trying to arrange passage for others. She said it was not a question. We cannot prove it, but yes, I believe that. Just when we thought the worst of this story was over, when it appeared that Clara might finally find freedom, the true horror of what happened in St. Helena Parish is about to come to light. William was an idealistic man who had read her poetry and promised her things that could never be. He had at least tried, which was more than most men in his position would ever do. Duncan had him killed. The wagon continued north through the afternoon, following roads that became more rugged and isolated. Mercer described the path they would take. They would avoid main roads, travel mostly at night, and rely on a network of safe houses run by free black families and sympathetic whites. If this video is giving you chills, share it with a friend who enjoys dark mysteries. Don't forget to hit the like button to support our content and subscribe to never miss stories like this. Let's see what happens next. Illinois, months before Clara would be completely safe, but something was off. Clara couldn't quite put her finger on it, but she had learned to trust her gut from years of survival, and she knew that Isaiah Mercer wasn't lying about everything. His story about Richmond might be true and his shame might be real, but something about this rescue felt staged, as if he were acting out a script that someone else had written. She considered the auction, how well-timed the arrival of Mercer had been, about how he had known exactly when and where to bid, about how easily he had outmaneuvered Silas Guthrie. Too easy. Duncan Fairholme was a perfect man, planning everything with the accuracy of a general deploying troops. If he had wanted Clara to go to Guthrie, she would have done so unless Duncan had wanted something else to happen. The realization sank over Clara like ice water. The wagon continued north through the afternoon, following roads that became more rugged and isolated. Mercer described the path they would take, avoiding major roads, traveling primarily at night, and depending on a network of safe houses run by sympathetic whites and free black families. It would take weeks to reach Illinois, months before Clara would be truly safe, but something was wrong. But something about this rescue felt staged, performed, as though he was following a script written by someone else. Clara couldn't quite put it into words, but years of survival had taught her to trust her instincts, and she knew that Isaiah Mercer was lying. Not about everything. For example, his story about Richmond might be true and his shame might be real. She thought about the auction, how Mercer's arrival had been perfectly timed, how he had known exactly when and where to bid. Duncan Fairholme did not make mistakes. He planned everything with the precision of a general deploying troops, and if he had wanted Clara to go to Guthrie, she would have done so, unless Duncan had wanted something different to happen. The realization that this was not a rescue sank over Clara like ice water. He had outmaneuvered Silas Guthrie too easily. Mercer built a small fire and offered Clara dried meat and cornbread, and she ate mechanically, her mind working through possibilities. If Duncan wanted her dead, he could have had her killed at Bellamont. Simple, quiet. Enslaved women disappeared on a regular basis and no one questioned it. This was a hunt. That night, they camped in a clearing several miles from the closest settlement, deep enough in the forest that firelight would not be visible from the road. However, Duncan did not want her dead. He wanted William destroyed completely, and since William was already gone and out of Duncan's grasp, he needed evidence that William's treachery had consequences, that the child Clara carried suffered, and more importantly, that William was to blame for the escape. Slave catchers, likely men, would intercept them somewhere along the way and claim that Clara was a runaway. The deed of sale would be deemed fraudulent, and Clara would be returned to Duncan in a way that would make her fate seem like justice rather than cruelty. Mercer was not saving Clara. He was delivering her to something worse than Silas Guthrie. The only question was when the trap would spring. Clara waited until Mercer had settled on the opposite side of the fire, his back against a tree, his hat pulled low. She waited until his breathing deepened. Then she carefully reached into the hem of her dress and said, since William had paid for this escape because he had involved abolitionists in a conspiracy to steal property, Duncan would be able to say that his brother had brought about Clara Ara's suffering. Retrieved the small but sharp knife Bethy had given her, tested the edge against her thumb and felt it bite. She could kill him now while he was sleeping. It would be simple, but what would happen next? She was pregnant, alone in a Louisiana forest without a map, money, or allies. And even if she managed to reach a road, she would be apprehended. Within days, a pregnant black woman traveling alone would be stopped, interrogated, and given back to whoever claimed ownership. Clara said softly, "I know this is not real." Mercer remained motionless, and for a few seconds she thought he might be sleeping. Then he pushed his hat back and turned to face her across the fire. "Explain." Mercer's face remained the same. "Why would I agree to such a plan? Money or safety? Maybe Duncan threatened to expose you for helping runaways." "Duncan planned this. He wanted me to try to escape. He wanted it to fail. You are part of that plan. I don't know why, but I know this isn't what you told me it was. Perhaps he promised to pay you more than William did." The fire crackled between them. An owl called out in the dark. At last Isaiah Mercer said, "You are smarter than William gave you credit for." Clara Ara gripped the knife tighter. "So I'm correct." Mercer partially sat forward with his elbows resting on his knees. "Yes, Duncan is aware of this escape and he intended for it to fail. But you are mistaken about why I am assisting him." "Then why? Because if I didn't, someone else would." Clara Ara laughed bitterly. "So you chose the merciful betrayal." "I chose to give you a chance." "What chance?" "Duncan gave me a choice. Either lead you north and let his men intercept us in a way that leaves you physically unharmed, or refuse and watch him give the job to men who would make you wish you had never been born. And that someone else would deliver you directly to slave catchers who would hurt you in ways I will not describe. You mentioned that we would be intercepted, and we will be. Tomorrow afternoon, about 20 miles north of here, 4 men will be waiting on the road with documents stating that you are wanted, and that Judge Crenshaw has given them permission to bring you back to Belmont. They will also be fully within their legal rights." Mercer said, "Then I have no chance." "You have exactly one chance." He took a leather pouch out of his saddlebag and threw it across the fire to Clara. Inside, he found a letter introducing him to a family in Natchez and free people of color who could help him vanish. The pouch contained $150. The money was real, the letter was real, and Clara Ara opened the pouch. "Why would you do this?" "Because I meant what I said earlier. I'm not the man I was in Richmond. North is where Duncan expects you to run, but south to New Orleans, then by ship to Mexico. It's a longer, riskier route, but it's possible," Mercer corrected him. "They are going to intercept someone, and it does not have to be you." He stood and walked to the back of the wagon, returning with a bundle of women's clothing, including a dress that was larger than Clara's. But he added, "And because William Fairholm, whatever his faults, tried to do something decent, I will not let Duncan Fairholm turn that decency into a weapon." A bonnet and a shawl. 8 miles south of here is a small settlement with largely impoverished white people and free black families. Ruth Chambers, a woman who is about your height and complexion, is dying. She is consuming. She may have a few weeks left. I talked to her yesterday. You take this money and these clothes, and tomorrow morning you walk south to the settlement, and you tell the Chambers family that Isaiah sent you. They will hide you until the men who are looking for you have passed through the area, and they will help you get to Natchez. From there, you follow the letter's instructions. I paid her family $50 to help us." Clara Ara stared at him, not understanding. "And you, Ruth Chambers, will be in this wagon with you. She is too sick to walk more than a few steps, but she can sit up straight in a bonnet and shawl, and from a distance she will resemble you enough. Duncan's men will take her tomorrow when they intercept us, and by the time they realize their error, you will be gone." Clara's mind whirled. "Ruth will die. This is insane." "This is your only chance," Mercer said bluntly. "Duncan has men watching every route north. He has money, power, and the law on his side. You cannot fight him directly. You can only disappear so completely that he cannot find you. Ruth is already dying, and her family needs money to bury her properly so that they can care for her children. If I do this, if I run, Duncan will know you helped me. He will come after you." "He will try," Mercer said, glancing first at the knife in her hand, then at the money, and finally at Isaiah Mercer, whose face was partially obscured by firelight. "But I am harder to catch than you are, and I have friends who can make me disappear too." "Why?" inquired Clara. It was a broken word. Mercer remained silent for a while before asking, "Why would you risk this for me?" His voice was quieter than it had been all day when he spoke. "You didn't scream when they took you away from your mother in Richmond. You didn't engage in combat. You stood on that block and gave the men bidding on you a glance that conveyed your knowledge of their identities and abilities. When you were 15 years old, you had greater honor than any of them would ever have. For the past 8 years, I have seen that look in my dreams. I've got to do something to deserve the privilege of forgetting it." Tears burned behind Clarara's eyes, but she fought the need to let them fall. Slave women could not afford the luxury of crying. Tears were seen as a sign of weakness, of submission, of proof that they had come to terms with their situation. Early on, she had learnt to keep her pain inside and allow it to solidify into something more difficult. Mercer went on, "There is something else you should know." He had lowered his voice as if the forest itself were listening. "Concerning Duncan Fairholme. How about him? We learned stuff from William before he passed away. Information about Bellamont and his brother." Mercer hesitated, picking his words wisely. "You weren't the first." Clarara's heart froze. "The initial what?" Silas Guthrie was the first woman Duncan sold. 3 others were present. They had all worked as housekeepers for the last 5 years. They're all young. To get them out of the main home, Duncan would set up a small transgression or an excuse. He would then put them up for auction and sell them to Guthrie, always at prices that seemed strangely cheap. Lawful at all times recorded. Judge Crenshaw was always present. How did they fare? 2 perished in a year. 1 from wounds Guthrie said were unintentional. The other person had what was known as fever, but Bellamont's slaves claimed she had been beaten so severely that she never fully recovered. Sarah was the name of the 3rd woman. She completely vanished. She raced away, Guthrie said. Completely vanished. She raced away, Guthrie said. She was never seen again. Clarara remembered the old cook who had handed her the knife. Bethy would have been familiar with these ladies, would have seen them all go, and would have known exactly what would happen to Clarara if she fell into Guthrie's hands. Why would Duncan act in this way? Though she believed she already knew the answer, Clarara asked. Simply because he could, Mercer stated. Because he had complete authority over his property under the law. Absolute power also exposes the true nature of men. Duncan Fairholme is a man who takes pleasure in the misery of others, especially women, especially when they exhibit intelligence, dignity, or any other trait that challenges his sense of superiority. And this was permitted by Judge Crenshaw. It was facilitated by Judge Crenshaw. Each transaction was lawful. All property transfers are duly recorded. Why these women were being sold for such low prices was never questioned by the judge. The trend was never questioned. He just collected his fees and signed the paperwork. Clarara's gaze shifted to the knife she was holding. She was preceded by 3 ladies. The same mechanism annihilated them all. They were all as completely wiped out of history as though they had never happened. William was aware of this. A year or so ago he found it. Records were discovered in Duncan's study. He began reading abolitionist books at that point, when he began to think that the system, rather than just the cruelty of its members, was the issue. He made an effort to persuade Duncan to release the Bellamont slaves, offered to give up his own inheritance in exchange for Duncan's release. He was laughed at by Duncan. Another branch was added to the flames by Mercer. William regarded your pregnancy as an opportunity to do something good and spare at least one person from the device. He got in touch with Cincinnati abolitionists, gave them all of his money, and arranged for your escape. Duncan, however, discovered how. We believe we were deceived by someone in Cincinnati, someone who supplied Duncan with information after selling it to slave catchers. It was too late when William discovered that the escape plan had been jeopardized. To make sure you would wind up precisely where he wanted you to, Duncan had previously reorganized the entire auction. What made William travel to Kentucky then, if he was aware that the scheme had failed? Mercer's mouth clenched, since he was looking for a different route. He reasoned that he could set up a backup rescue, which Duncan would not have expected, provided he could get in touch with the Underground Railroad network and send messages to conductors operating in Louisiana. However, Duncan discovered him first. Duncan's reach is longer than any of us understood. He is connected to slaves. Catchers are men that pursue humans for a living in 5 different states. When William started asking inquiries in Kentucky, someone reported it. William passed away 3 days later. Slowly, Clarara took in this knowledge. William, naive and romantic. Indeed, William had made an effort. And more than that, he had not given up after his initial plan had failed. Even if it did nothing in the end, that had to be worth something. Clara questioned. They stated the fever killed him. What actually happened? We will never be able to be sure. His body was found in a boarding house in Louisville. The proprietor said William had been sick for 2 days, complained of stomach pain, vomiting, died in his sleep. But one of the abolitionists who saw the body afterward said William's fingernails were blue, his lips were discolored. Those are signs of poisoning, not fever. Clara considered this. A man so consumed by the need for control that he would murder his own blood relative. About a system that gave such men power and called it civilization. If Duncan could kill William and make it look natural, Clara noted slowly, then he could kill you too. Either way, William became a problem that Duncan needed to eliminate, and Duncan is very good at eliminating problems while keeping his own hands clean. Mercer looked at her directly. Because I am tired of being the one who looks away. I am tired of telling myself that this plan of yours to send me south while Ruth takes my place will only succeed if Duncan thinks you were sincerely trying to help me escape. If he suspects you intentionally failed him, you are a dead man. I know, then why risk it? Clara realized that it was the same logic that had inspired William. The same beautiful, pointless logic that led to the death of idealistic people. But it was also the only logic that ever changed. I'm just doing my job. Just following orders, just trying to survive in a system I did not create. Every person who makes that excuse, who puts their own safety before the suffering of others, strengthens the system. I cannot abolish slavery on my own, but I can save one person. Clara decided to head south, but first she needed to know about the Chambers family. How did you locate them? How did you set this up? I've been touring Louisiana for 3 months in preparation for your escape, and I developed contacts throughout numerous communities. Provided financial assistance to families who might be willing to assist. 3 families agreed, including the Chambers family. 3 families? You prepared several escape routes? I prepared for contingencies. Duncan is not the only one who can think ahead. Clara sensed a change in herself. This man, this stranger who had perhaps redemption, was not a single dramatic gesture, but rather the slow, methodical work of becoming someone different from what you had been. What about Ruth? Clara asked. What will Duncan's men do to her when they realize they have the wrong woman? Nothing, Mercer said. He had spent 3 months planning to save her, had risked his life to create options, and had carefully considered scenarios and backup plans with the same meticulous care Duncan applied to his cruelties. They can't torture someone who is that far gone, and they can't prove she voluntarily participated in a deception. I might have made an honest mistake and thought Ruth was you, but Duncan won't accept that explanation. She will already be dying. By the time they find the switch, Ruth will probably be unconscious or delirious from fever. Clara was not completely convinced, but she had no other choice. She considered Ruth Chambers, a woman she had never met, who was giving up her last days to give Clara a chance at freedom. It was a debt that could never be paid back. I want to meet her, Clara said before I left. I want to thank her. He just has to acknowledge that he cannot prove otherwise. And without proof, even Duncan Fairholme has limits to what he can do publicly. That is not a smart move. The less you know about each other, the safer you both are. A woman is dying for me, Clara remarked, her voice harsher than she meant to sound. I do not care about safe. Looking her in the eye and telling her that I will not waste what she is giving me is the least I can do. Mercer looked at her for a while. Then he gave a nod. In the morning, we'll make a stop in the settlement. You'll have 15 minutes, no more. Shortly after daybreak, they arrived to the Chamber settlement. It was more of a group of cabins with maybe 30 residents grouped around a communal well than a community. Free black families predominate, with a small number of white families too impoverished to give a damn about racial hierarchy, the type of location that existed in the spaces between parishes, but was not shown on any official maps that managed to thrive by evading those who would attempt to destroy it. The tiniest cabin on the outskirts of the community was occupied by Ruth Chambers. 2 years prior, her husband had perished in a logging accident. While their mother passed away in relative quiet, her 3 children, ages 4 to 12, were being looked after by neighbors, relatives, since tranquil deaths were not possible due to consumption. It gradually drained you, reduced your lungs to worthless flesh, and made every breath a struggle you knew you would lose. Mercer trailed behind Clara as she went into the cabin. With only one window coated in oiled paper, the interior was dark. The scent of sage and sickness filled the air. The latter burnt in a vain attempt to cover the former. Ruth rested against the distant wall on a slender bed. She was slender enough that her body scarcely raised the blanket covering her. Her eyes were clear when she glanced at Clara Ara, but her complexion had the grayish color of someone whose organs were dying. Ruth said, "You are the one." She hardly raised her voice above a whisper. "My name is Clara Ara. I was informed you were valuable. I was curious to find out if that was accurate." Clara took a step toward the bed. "I'm not sure if I'm worthy of what you're offering. According to Ruth, no one is worth a life. But I didn't agree to help you for that reason. Since my kids needed the money that Mr. Mercer paid, I consented. Because I am dying anyway, and because if I have to die, I would rather die doing something that means something." Clara Ara said, "What will happen to your children?" "They'll go with my sister. They will be fed for the winter with the money Mr. Mercer gave us. Perhaps enough to purchase a little piece of land on which they can cultivate their own food. It's more than I otherwise could have given them." Clara Ara felt tears burning again. She took Ruth's hand and knelt next to the bed. The bones were light and delicate like the bones of birds. "I'll keep you in mind," Clara Ara responded. "I'll teach my kid about you and your actions. We won't forget your name." Ruth gave a feeble smile. "Where I'm headed, names don't really matter. However, if remembering brings you comfort, then do so. Just make sure you survive. Ensure the baby survives. Don't allow me to exchange my life for nothing." "I'll survive," Clara pledged. "Whatever it takes, excellent." Ruth's eyes twitched shut. "Now go, Mr. Mercer will advise you what to do next. And don't turn around." Looking back simply makes the departure more difficult. After giving Ruth's hand another squeeze, Clara got up. Ruth spoke once more as she turned to face the door. "Another thing. They'll be upset when they take me tomorrow and Duncan Fairholme's men find I'm not you. They may say hurtful things. They will not harm me, but they may threaten me. I'll see to it that that happens." "How?" Ruth's eyes opened once more. Even though her body was feeble, there was something strong in them now. "Since I'll already be deceased." Clara stopped. "What are you saying?" Mercer took a step forward. "I talked about this with Ruth. The time must be exact. Duncan's guys will have little leverage if she passes away during the interception before they can question her. They can't demonstrate dishonesty. No one can be punished by them. They can only acknowledge their failure." Clara questioned incredulously. "You are planning to die at precisely the right moment?" "I am planning to die on my own terms," Ruth corrected. "In any case, consumption will kill me in a matter of weeks. I may then decide how and when. In this manner, my passing has a purpose rather than being merely another tragedy." Clara understood. The settlement doctor then gave Ruth medication, most likely morphine or Lord, to help her cope with her last days of suffering. And she intended to purposefully take too much of it in order to time her death to coincide with the interception, which would have destroyed Duncan's entire scheme. In equal parts, it was terrible and magnificent. "You've considered everything," Clara said. "No," Ruth answered. "Mr. Mercer considered every possibility. I'm merely accepting it. Go now before I ruin this dramatic scene by coughing again." Clara had more to say. She wanted to clarify that she recognized the seriousness of Ruth's actions, that this debt would be a burden on her for the remainder of her life, that she would ensure Ruth's kids understood their mother was a hero when she passed away. However, Ruth's breathing was laborious and shallow, and her eyes had closed once more. Mercer was at the door already, beckoning Clara to follow him. So she went out. She knew she would never see Ruth Chambers again as she left that dark cabin. Understanding that the woman on that bed would die in 2 days, she would have given Clara a chance at life by dying. The air was already being heated by the morning sun outside. Mercer gave Clara the letter of introduction and the leather purse containing the cash. "There's a trail through the forest to the south behind this cabin," he remarked. "For about 3 miles, follow it. A road will be reached. Continue west on the road until you get to the Black Swan Bar. Marcus is the owner's name. Tell him you were sent by Isaiah. He'll be aware of what to do next. After that, you adhere to the letter's instructions. If someone doesn't utilize the passwords listed there, don't trust them. Only move at night. Steer clear of major roadways. Get to Natchez. Board a ship. Travel to Mexico. Vanish so thoroughly that Duncan Fairholme is left wondering what happened to you for the rest of his life." Clara gave a nod. She felt the weight of the money pouch and rearranged the pile of clothing beneath her arm. "How about you?" she inquired. "Ruth and I will head north. After I transfer her to Duncan's men, I will also vanish. He'll pursue you. Give him a chance." Mercer grinned somberly. "I've spent my entire life escaping things. I'm really skilled at it." Clara Ara wished to express her gratitude, intended to convey a deep message about atonement, second chances, and the potential for transformation. However, words didn't feel enough. Instead, she took an unexpected action. She gave him a hug. Mercer tensed up, obviously unprepared for physical contact. Then very slowly he gave the hug back. "Thank you," Clara muttered. "Make it through." Mercer answered, "I need no more gratitude than that." They parted ways. Clara Ara turned in the direction Ruth had pointed. She didn't turn around. The departure was made more difficult by looking back. Isaiah Mercer looked from behind her till she vanished into the forest. Afterward, he went back to the cottage where Ruth Chambers was dying, where a strategy had been established that would either spare Clara's life or destroy all those concerned, which would be decided during the next 24 hours. Wearing the bundle of garments over her arm and carrying the leather pouch, Clara Ara departed before morning. Mercer turned to tie the wagon after seeing her leave, a silhouette against the gray pre-dawn light. As the sun rose, Ruth Chambers was seated in the rear of the wagon, her face concealed by the bonnet and covered by Clara Ara's shawl. The pregnancy cushion Mercer had made out of rags and fastened around her waist seemed almost real, because she was so thin. During the morning, they headed north. Ruth remained silent. Weeks ago, the majority of her voice had been lost due to the consumption. She just there, swaying to the wagon's movements. She was having trouble breathing. 4 men on horseback came on the road ahead at about 2 in the afternoon. They were just what Mercer had described. Hard men with firearms and the assurance that law-abiding citizens would never doubt what they were doing. Porter, the leader, walked up to the wagon holding some documents. "Mercer, Isaiah, a warrant for the repatriation of fugitive property is in place, yes." Clara Ara, a black woman, ran away from Bellamont Plantation. "We have cause to suspect that you are in possession of her. I officially bought that woman." "I have the deed of sale," Mercer said. "The deed was acquired through fraudulent means. The transaction has been revoked by Judge Crenshaw. The woman must be given back to her owner." Porter shifted to the wagon's rear. He drew the canvas cover away. Ruth Chambers gazed up at him, her eyes already halfway to another world and fever brilliant. "This her?" inquired Porter. Among his friends, one wrote, examining Ruth's face more closely. "The hat makes it difficult to tell." "She is ill," Mercer replied, saying, "Make her stand up." Mercer got into the back of the wagon and said, "I didn't ask. Make her stand." He pulled Ruth to her feet gently. She wavered. Her feet gently. She wavered. Almost fell. Under the shawl, the pregnancy pillow moved a little. Porter's gaze grew strained. "According to Mercer, she looks wrong." "Consumption," he observed. "On the way, she caught it. She is too sick to go north, so I was taking her back south." "Practical." Porter took Ruth by the arm and drew her to him. The bonnet dropped back. Ruth's skin was gray and her face was haggard. If you squinted and didn't look too carefully, she might have looked somewhat like Clara. At close range, however, the distinctions were clear. Slowly, Porter responded, "This is not her. This is the woman I bought at the Greensburg auction, I promise." "You are lying." Porter gave Ruth such a painful release. Back onto the wagon bed, and she fell. He said to his men, "Search everything. She is here somewhere." They ripped through supplies, tore apart the wagon, looked under the driver's bench, and scrutinized every square inch of canvas. There was nothing to find, so they didn't find anything. The papers in Porter's hand had lost their significance as he stood in the street. He had received payment to intercept a particular woman. It would be easy, he had been told, and now he was going back to Duncan Fairholme with nothing. He asked, "Where is she?" Calmly, Mercer remarked, "I have no idea what you are talking about." "This is the lady I bought. It is not my problem if she is not the woman you are seeking." Porter stepped forward. "Duncan Fairholme will be informed." "I'm hoping he does. Maybe he will give an explanation for his harassment of law-abiding citizens regarding property disputes." They were at a standstill. Porter was aware that he had been outwitted, but he was unable to provide evidence. He would have to tell Judge Crenshaw why he killed a man who seemed innocent if he killed Mercer. He would have to defend his capture of a dying woman who was obviously not the wanted criminal, if he took Ruth. James Ridley, a former slave catcher and one of Porter's men, had been closely examining Ruth. He had taken involved in numerous captures throughout his 15-year career. Everything about this circumstance felt wrong, and he was skilled at judging human property. Ridley pointed to Ruth and remarked, "We need to question her." Ruth was still laying in the wagon bed where she had fallen, and Porter knelt next to her. Though open, her eyes lacked focus. She was breathing erratically and shallowly now. "Where is Clara?" Porter insisted. "What did you do with her?" Ruth's gaze shifted to Porter with apparent effort. Then, without realizing it, she grinned. "Gone," she said in a whisper. "Within your grasp. She's out of Duncan Fairholme's grasp." "Where? Never will I tell you." Ruth grinned more broadly, her teeth showing blood. "I can be defeated. I will be dead long before you can receive any answers, no matter how much you torment me. I ensured that." Porter got it. After that, the woman poisoned herself. During this very confrontation, she had purposefully taken something that would kill her, had used her own demise as a weapon to foil Duncan's scheme. Porter exclaimed, "You stupid woman," but his tone had become uncertain. "Do you think anyone will benefit from this? She will finally be discovered by Duncan. He always does, perhaps." Ruth concurred. The foam had started to form at the corners of her lips, and now blood was streaming freely from her mouth, blending with it. "Or perhaps she will vanish into a world devoid of authority for guys like Duncan Fairholme and you. Perhaps she will live a long life. Perhaps her child will be free. It's possible that your entire system will fail and be only a nightmare. It will be difficult for our descendants to accept that it was true." She made a damp, rattling sound as her respiration faltered, paused, and resumed. "Knowing that I contributed to the destruction of something Duncan spent months on makes me die. Mr. Porter, what will you know when you die? That you hunted people to make money? That the system you worked for was made to crush souls? That you had the option of choosing mercy instead of cruelty?" Ruth Chambers inhaled deeply. Then, in a scene that would torment James Ridley for the rest of his life, she died in the road with 4 slave catchers standing over her, and Isaiah Mercer staring from next to his ripped-up wagon, while the Louisiana sun beat down on her. Porter was silent for a good minute as he stood over Ruth's body. He then faced his men. "Here we bury her. The woman passed away before we could interview her, so we tell Duncan that we stopped the wagon. We inform him that although Mercer says it was the woman from the auction, we were unable to confirm it before she passed away. The root is frigid, we tell him." One of the men replied, "Duncan will know we failed." Porter clarified that Duncan will be well aware of what transpired. He won't be able to prove it, but he will know he was outmaneuvered, and he is powerless without evidence. Ruth Chambers was laid to rest next to the road in a small cemetery. There was no memorial, no ceremony, just another black body coming home to Louisiana, one of thousands that would never be formally remembered or publicly grieved. Isaiah Mercer was expressionless as he observed the funeral. Upon completion, after the men had he stood alone next to the disturbed ground as they mounted their horses and rode out. He didn't offer up a prayer. Even though he wasn't religious, he said Ruth's name 3 times out loud as if it would somehow respect her deed. Then he went northward. He would continue to pretend that he had been trying to get Clara to free territory, as he had intended.
He would say he didn't understand why she had passed away.
He would submit a complaint to Judge Crenshaw alleging that the property had been harmed during transportation and asking for damages. The report was rejected. According to Judge Crenshaw, Mercer assumed all risk because he had bought the property in ACES condition. The seller's knowledge of the property's flaws was inferred from the 12-cent minimum bid. There would be no payment. In a strange way, it was the ideal legal outcome. Everyone had complied with the correct protocol. Every paperwork had been filed correctly. Even though the law had worked as intended, a dying woman and a former slave trader seeking atonement had stopped Duncan Fairholme's retaliation. Years later, in 1868, James Ridley had a religious awakening and told Reverend Thomas Hargrove, a Methodist preacher, about his previous transgressions. A thorough description of the events leading up to the interception on that March afternoon in 1853 was one of those confessions. Ruth's last words were recounted by Ridley, described the intense intelligence in her dying eyes and the blood on her lips, explained how she had grinned as life departed her body, confident that she had destroyed Duncan Fairholme's meticulously designed system of brutality. "In my life, I have apprehended more than 200 fugitives," Ridley said the minister.
"I have witnessed both sexes pleading for forgiveness.
"I have witnessed them struggle, cry, and pray. But I have never witnessed anyone make such a conscious decision to die as Ruth Chambers did. Her final breath became an act of rebellion. The fact that she passed away free despite the law's declaration that she wasn't disturbs me more than the others put together. Recognizing the historical significance of Ridley's confession, Reverend Hargrove recorded it. However, he never released it while he was alive. After he passed away in 1922, his daughter Sarah found the confession in his personal files while going through his belongings. She was appalled by the implications as much as the content, which was unsettling enough. For 34 years, her father had been aware of this tragedy, but he had never reported it, shared it with journalists or historians, or even kept it a secret, as if recording evil was enough without facing it head-on. Unlike her father, Sarah Fletcher took action. In 193, she revealed the confession she published a little abolitionist periodical that was not widely read. She recorded it in the public domain. We know the specifics of Ruth Chambers' last moments because, to that publication, how we know she made a conscious decision to die. How we know she grinned before passing away, confident that she had thwarted Duncan Fairholme's scheme. For the following 6 months, Duncan Fairholme looked for Clara. Professional slave catchers were used by him. He put ads in 3 different states' newspapers. The awards he provided rose from $500 to $2,000 in value. She was never located by him. In 1861, Judge Crenshaw passed away shortly before Louisiana broke away from the Union. Whatever he knew about the real situation, he carried it with him to his death. After surviving the Civil War, Duncan Fairholme lost everything. In 1863, Union troops burned Bellamon. In 1872, Duncan passed away alone and bankrupt in a Mobile, Alabama boarding home. Margaret, his wife, had abandoned him years before. The name of his sibling was never spoken to him again. The overseer, Silas Guthrie, was discovered dead in a ditch outside of Greensburg in 1854. He was discovered face down in less than 6 inches of water, although the official cause was classified as accidental drowning. There were never any charges brought. Until 1863, when he departed Louisiana before Union forces arrived, Nathaniel Pwitt remained the parish recorder. Never again was he heard from. The record of Clara's sale was not the only item on the receipt found during the courthouse repairs in 1897. A note to whoever finds this was written in William Fairholme's hand on the back. William Fairholme is my name. I attempted to protect a loved one from my brother's brutality. I failed her, just as I have failed at most significant things. If you are reading this, be aware that the worst evil is not the evil committed by malevolent individuals, but rather the evil that is allowed by decent men without the guts to do action. When it counted, I didn't have that courage. I hope you won't. The ramifications of this letter were immediately clear to the historians who discovered it. In order to keep it secret for another century, they buried it once more and sealed it back into the wall. In 1998, while renovating again, the receipt was found. It was saved this time. Clara's destiny is still unclear. However, it is currently housed in the Louisiana State Archives. According to some historians, she may have reached Mexico and settled at Veracruz, where a group of runaway slaves had taken up residence. Some believe she visited Haiti. Some others think she passed away on the trip. According to one scenario put forth by a genealogist in 2006, a woman who fit Clara's description was listed in Illinois census records in 1870 as Clara Freeman, and she had a mixed-race daughter who was born in 1853. Ruth was listed as the daughter's name. If the theory is right, then Isaiah Mercer was successful if Clara did live and establish a life free from oppression. The rescue that was supposed to fail didn't. Nothing was captured by the trap Duncan so meticulously set up. However, we are unable to tell for sure. There are gaps in the historical record. During the Civil War, documents were destroyed. Memories were suppressed on purpose. Fragments are all that remain. Census records, a receipt, a message concealed in a wall, and a deed of sale queries that will never be fully addressed, and queries that could be referring to someone else entirely. Perhaps history's silence is a form of response in and of itself. Maybe Clara's successful disappearance is evidenced by the fact that we are unable to track her path, that it was hard to follow her, that she fulfilled the dreams of countless enslaved people. Total and absolute independence from the system that aimed to regulate every element of their lives. Or maybe she passed away forgotten and alone. another victim of a system that effectively and bureaucratically destroyed millions of lives. That ambiguity is exemplified by the 12-cent transaction. It was observed, documented in government records, and it was lawful. However, it feels incredibly wrong in a sense that goes beyond the already significant wrong of slavery. Purposeful undervaluation of human life, the ruthless use of bureaucratic procedures, the involvement of judges, clerks, and regular people in a transaction that is intended to inflict pain. All participants made decisions. Retaliation was Duncan's choice. William made a risky decision, but it was too late. Isaiah Mercer made the decision to be saved. Judge Crenshaw put the rule of law before mercy. Ruth Chambers made the decision to aid a stranger by dying. Clara made the decision to live no matter what. As witnesses, the 7 individuals who signed the deed of sale also made the conscious decision to take part in something that was obviously wrong. Their signatures, which attest to their collusion, are still on that paper and are kept in archives. In an effort to prevent anyone from raising awkward questions about what their ancestors had done, seen, or allowed, their descendants worked for generations to suppress this tale. However, tales like these have a way of coming to light and clamoring to be spoken. This mystery demonstrates that the law itself was the most terrible weapon ever created. Not the whip or the chain. A pregnant lady might be sold for the price of a loaf of bread thanks to the system that legalized horror and allowed men to ruin lives with just a signature and a few copper coins. Not because anyone thought she was worthless, but especially to show that value could be given or taken away at will by people in positions of authority. How do you feel about this tale? Do you think Clara Ara made it out alive? Do you believe she reached freedom, or did Duncan's brutality claim her in any case, even after death? Post a comment below. Please subscribe and push the notification if you liked this story and would like to see more horror stories like it. Bell and share with a mystery-loving person. I'll see you in the upcoming video.